The driver of the 11 car has been fined $50,000 and docked 25 driver points for making intentional contact with Ross Chastain in Sunday's Cup race at Phoenix. Hamlin admitted the contact was intentional on his podcast on Monday, which played into NASCAR's decision for the penalty. More on that in just a few minutes. Now, NASCAR also penalized each of Hendrick Motorsports' 4 Cup teams and the number 31 Cup team of Kaulig Racing for unapproved parts modifications involving the hood louvers at Phoenix this past weekend. Here's how these penalties break down. The 5 teams have been docked 100 team and driver points and 10 playoff points, with the exception of the 9 team, which did not lose driver points since they are using a substitute driver and Josh Berry, who's competing full-time in Xfinity right now. Now, the 5 crew chiefs in Cliff Daniels, Al Gustafson, Rudy Fugle, Blake Harris, and Trent Owens have been fined $100,000 and each suspended the next 4 races. Here's what NASCAR Senior Vice President of Competition, Ellen Sawyer, had to say about the violations.
We've made it very clear through the very start of this project with the next gen car, working directly with the garage, the owners, and what the deterrent model needs to be. And it's NASCAR's responsibility to make sure that we uphold that. So we will continue to do what we need to do to keep this car in check. It's for the betterment of our sport. It's the betterment for the business model. And that's our responsibility, and we will continue to do that. There's areas, again, that has been approved, and we've worked with the teams on the parts to be able to get them on their fitment and things of that nature. Again, this one rose to a level that was way beyond that. One was in the opening inspection, and one was in the pre-qualifying inspection. But I think it's fair to say that there could be performance around these modifications, but as long as everyone stays within the process, then we would be fine. But that wasn't the case here. You know, let's also give credit where credit's due. They went out and still had an outstanding race on Sunday and performed at a high level without those modifications.
Hendrick Motorsports released this statement: "We are disappointed with today's decision by NASCAR to issue penalties and have elected to appeal based on a variety of facts that include louvers provided to teams through NASCAR's mandated single-source supplier do not match the design submitted by the manufacturer and approved by NASCAR, documented inconsistent and unclear communication by the sanctioning body specifically related to the louvers, and recent comparable penalties issued by NASCAR have been related to issues discovered during a post-race inspection." Now, for the March 19th NASCAR Cup Series event at Atlanta Motor Speedway, our organization has made the strategic decision not to request deferral of personnel suspensions. Team rosters for this weekend will be updated as soon as a substitute crew chief has been determined. So obviously, this has major implications for the playoff leaderboard after Phoenix. This is how things looked for the drivers affected. William Byron, as you see, is in first place, has those 2 wins, the 13 playoff points. Alex Bowman in 4th, but first in regular season points, 73 to the good. Kyle Larson, he was 7th on the board, plus 56. Justin Haley, 24th, 32 below the line. Now, here's how things look after today's penalties. Byron goes from 1st on the board to 3rd, drops from 13 playoff points to now just 3. Bowman from 4th all the way down to 24th, goes from plus 73 to 25 below and has negative 10 playoff points. Larson from 7th to 32nd, hit hard as well, now minus 42. Hamlin goes from 9th on the board to 13th, lost those 20 points. He goes from plus 44 to plus 24. And Haley, 24th on the board to 35th, from minus 32 to minus 119, negative 10 playoff points. So major hit for those involved. And with that now, we bring in, let's talk a little Denny Hamlin in just a minute as well, because we don't want to forget about that big news to add into everything else. But it's America's crew chief, Larry McReynolds. It's Regan Smith. You guys just heard a lot. So first of all, let's talk about how you process the stuff for the Chevy guys we just heard.
Yeah, but I do want to emphasize what Elton Sawyer with NASCAR said, that obviously those 4 Hendrick cars did not have these unapproved louvers on Sunday, and they won the race, finished second. In fact, put all 4 drivers in the top 10. And there was that one part of me, I can't say I was totally surprised when this came down, Josh and Regan, but there was that part of me, and it kind of go back to one of the Hendrick points that said, they didn't qualify with them. They didn't race them. They did practice with them on Friday. So was there any competitive advantage whatsoever? But when you look at the rule says that the louvers are a single source part. There's about 30 plus single source parts on the next gen car. It includes all the body. It includes the transaxle, the hubs, the wheels. And what the rule says, a single source part, you take it out of the box, you apply it on the race car, install it on the race car. You do not alter or modify it in any capacity. Obviously, that's what NASCAR deemed they did, and that's the reason we got the L2 penalty.
You know, I think one of the big things that we have to look at also is the consistency from NASCAR on this. When it comes to those single source parts that you talk about, NASCAR has been very consistent with that in terms of the penalties that they've handed down for it. And to your point, whether it was on a Friday, on a Saturday, or a Sunday, it was on the race car. And I think that they're basically saying, listen, we do not want you to touch these parts. Going back to last year, it was the same scenario that we don't want these parts touched. And you know, the thing about it is the teams have asked for this.
Yes.
The teams wanted NASCAR to police this and do this way. Now, there's some things within that Hendrick statement that came out that can still be unpackaged at some point. If you read between the lines on some of what they're saying there, and there's some things that kind of raise an eyebrow for me there. But in the general scheme of things, when we look at that penalty, this is consistent with what they've been doing.
If they ever just crack that door that much and go, well, okay, we realize you only did this to it, they might as well throw it away, because the door will not only be open, it'll be kick slam off the hinges.
How about the decision to begin the penalties this weekend and not try and wait down the line?
Yeah, I thought about that, and I think that's very smart on Hendrick Motorsports' part, because I think they realize that more than likely the appeal penalty, at the best case, may just reduce, maybe like the suspension of the crew chiefs, to 2 races. When you think about the Atlanta Motor Speedway race weekend, it's qualify only. No, there's no practice whatsoever. You unload, you qualify, and you race the race on Sunday. I think it's smart for them to do that.
From my perspective, I looked at where's Talladega on the schedule? How far away are we from Talladega? Because that would be the only other race other than Atlanta that you would look at and say, okay, we can get by without the crew chief for this particular weekend. So yeah, suck it up, deal with the penalty right now, and get it started and see where the appeals process goes.
How about these drivers that now find themselves in such a deep hole? Yes, early in the season, but when you look at who's affected, do you see the ability for them to make up ground, or is this kind of a tough deal for them?
Yeah, I mean, you never want to be without your crew chief, Josh. I mean, that's why the crew chief is the crew chief. But, you know, I go back to my days as a crew chief. We didn't have any depth. We didn't have the resources to pull from. Yeah, you don't want to be without it. It's not optimum, but I promise you, whoever they put on those pit boxes for the 4 teams and drivers, they're going to be just fine, because those 4 crew chiefs that are suspended, they will be corresponding and communicating with the pit box. The only other thing I want to say, I heard somebody say today, well, if they win, those 100 points don't mean anything. I beg to differ on that, because there's a thing called a regular season championship. Remember, when the checkered flag waves at Daytona in August, they're going to award playoff points, a lot of playoff points to the top 10, including the regular season champion like Chase Elliott last year, 15 playoff points. So those regular season points are very valuable.
Yeah, and when you look at how far down those drivers have been bumped right now, don't forget, it's early in the year, and any penalty or even a bad race really makes a car jump a ways down in the standings this early in the season. There's plenty of time for them to make those up. The one thing I look at is those playoff points, and the fact that -10 playoff points, when you look at that as the season plays out, is it likely that those cars are going to start -10? Not necessarily, not the way that they've been running, but it is a possibility that you could have one of those Hendrick Motorsports cars starting negative in points as the playoffs start.
I think poor old Justin Haley, it puts him negative regular season points right now after 4 races.
By quite a few, also. He's got a hole to dig out of.
You know, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because we got more penalties to talk about. So let's jump right back into the Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain thing. And in case you forgot, in the final laps in the desert, Denny made contact with the 1 car of Ross Chastain, and And as a result, NASCAR fined Hamlin $50,000 and docked him 25 driver points for violating the rule against attempting to manipulate the outcome of the race or championship and wrecking or spinning another vehicle. So here's the incident from Sunday, and as you see, the 11 car gets up the track and into the one, sending him into the wall, folks. This is no mistake. Denny said as much on his podcast called Actions Detrimental, ironic, on Monday, so take a listen.
I'm about to get passed by everybody behind me who's on fresh tires. I'm about to finish in the mid-teens. And I said, "You're coming with me, buddy."
Really?
I let the wheel go, and I said, "He's coming with me." And so I've said for a while, well, you got to do something to get these guys' attention, whatever, and I've said it, and I think that Ross doesn't like it when I speak his name in the media and when I had this microphone. But I told him, well, I have a microphone, and I'm going to call it like I see it. And until you get a microphone, you can then say whatever you want about me. But the fact is while I'm sitting here talking, I'm going to call things the way I see it, and sometimes I'm going to have to call myself out, which I'm the dumbass who lost just as many spots as he did. But at the time, I said, well, I'm going to finish anyway, and I'm just going to make sure that he finishes right here with me.
All right, well, you heard from Denny, and let's hear from NASCAR Senior VP of Competition Elton Sawyer on the Hamlin penalty.
When you look at this one this past weekend, we would have viewed that as a racing incident. But then as 24 hours later, have a competitor that has gone on a podcast, which I will say we're delighted that Denny has a podcast. We think that's great, interacts with the fans. But when you start admitting that you have intentionally done something that would compromise the results of the end of the race, there's no other way to look at that. We're going to get involved in those situations. We've been consistent in the past with that, and we will be consistent going forward. We want them to show their personalities. We want them to settle this. We don't want to be in the middle of it. But this one has gone on for a little while. It went on last year. Felt like maybe we were in a good spot. Looks like it was rearing its head again. And then the comments that were made afterwards put us in a position that we had no choice but to react.
I mean, you heard it there. They have no choice to react. Denny said it all. So what was your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, I have so much respect for Denny Hamlin. I mean, the man has won 48 Cup races. There's no doubt he's a first ballot NASCAR Hall of Famer. But honestly, I think the penalty fits the crime because he put NASCAR in a box. Elton Sawyer said it. They were probably raising an eyebrow over what went on down there in turns 3 and 4 on that last lap anyhow. But when he goes on his podcast and go, absolutely, I did it. I think he put them in a corner and they had no choice. But this nonsense needed to stop. I love a good old feud. I love some drama, but this one had went too far. And the one thing I've not heard anybody say, and I was thinking about this on Monday, Denny Hamlin not only is a driver, he's an owner that owns 2 race teams. I know he's been one of the owners that's been very vocal about the cost of this sport, of doing business, the cost of parts and pieces, and there you basically, I know he didn't destroy the 2 race cars, but he basically wrecked 2 race cars. It absolutely makes no sense.
I find it kind of ironic that the name of that podcast is Actions Detrimental.
Very fitting.
And it's fitting, but what they don't say is who it's detrimental to, and obviously in this case it was detrimental to Denny. I saw the incident happen, and I didn't think a lot of it, to be perfectly honest, initially until I guess it was on Monday. And Monday, you get to watching it back, you see the in-cars, you start to take and understand what happened, and then the podcast comes out as well, and Denny starts talking about it. I think this is a case where sometimes it's bad to go out there and say exactly what you're thinking, which is exactly what Denny did. What bothers me a lot about that is both of those cars still could have had top 10 days.
Absolutely.
Ross definitely could have had a top 10 day. And Denny's, saying, I'm going backwards, I'm on old tires. Well, there was other cars on old tires with him. As a matter of fact, there was cars on 2 tires that won the race and finished second. So I thought that was a little bit strange. And I also I keep going back, and I know, Larry, on Monday you had mentioned that there was nothing prior in that race to have caused that. And indeed, if this goes back to the Clash, I can't wrap my head around that quite yet.
Yeah, I mean, I know he said on his podcast when he saw Chastain to his outside, he started seeing red. Well, if I'm Chris Gabehart, his crew chief, I'm seeing red. You wrecked the race car. to your point, we maybe had an opportunity for a 15th place finish. Instead, we finished outside the top 20, and you've taken 25 valuable points away from us. You just can't make these points up. There's no way to even put a price on points.
Yeah, no word yet if Denny's going to appeal, so we'll keep an eye out for that. But we're not done talking